Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now after months of searching and one deal that turned out too good to be true, I finally managed to get my hands on one of these, or at least my friend did for me. So after he texted me that it had arrived at his address, I was eager to turn up as early as possible this morning to collect this, the Inno3D iChill Herculez X4 Ultra Air Boss GTX 980Ti. And breathe. Launched in June of 2015, this very large and very expensive version of the 980Ti cost around £500 here in the UK. 4 years later and it cost just £160 on eBay. A pretty good price considering this is sort of just a thirstier 1070, though it will fall a little short of the Pascal based card in some games. So before we test it we simply must unbox it, otherwise, you know, it's a bit difficult to install. Removing everything from the box, and it's nice to see that we've got the original accessories in here, still in their packaging. Putting the extras and the card itself aside for a moment, and I was over the moon about the inclusion of a free Inno3D mousepad. Free is the optimistic way of looking at it, but what a pleasant surprise nonetheless. I thought the power supply guideline booklet was also a nice touch. It doesn't just tell us what PSU we need for this card, but a whole host of other GPUs as well. Let's look at the mighty beast itself then. It's called the X4 because of the 4 fans, not because it's 4 980Ti's in one, as some of you on Instagram, at RGNHD by the way, first thought. I wish, but imagine the cost and power consumption. I don't think this is rare in the traditional sense that a limited number were made, but it's certainly very hard to find one these days on the used market. I believe there's also an X3 model with just 3 fans, which was preferable as the mini top mounted fan on this one, as you can imagine, wasn't a widely admired design. I guess we'll have to see whether it helps with the temperatures a little later on. Taking a look round the card, and it certainly is an acquired taste. Its layeriness representative of its performance, I'm sure. This was a top-end card after all, so I'm certain it still does just fine today. I'm actually going to be testing this at 1080p, 1440p and 2160p, and as usual I'll be pairing it with an i5-8400 and 16 gigs of 3200MHz DDR4 RAM. Inno3D recommend a 600W power supply, and the card itself requires one 8-pin and one 6-pin connector and features a 250W TDP. The full specs are as on screen. So the first thing to do after installing it in the system was to take a look at the idle temperatures, which were actually quite good, and the fans remained rather quiet. Surprising, as I didn't think this would be the case. So for the performance tests I ran a few modern games at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, making graphical adjustments where necessary to try and maintain solid performance. I'll be showcasing a bit of gameplay from each resolution, as well as showing you the average 1% lows and 0.1% lows on screen too, as I normally do. So first of all we have Rage 2. At 1080p with the Ultra preset, the game ran with around 75 frames per second on average and stayed pretty steady throughout. I wasn't too sure about Rage 2 when I first played it, but after spending a couple of hours or so with it today, it seems pretty fun. Anyway, performance wise, 1080p it's fantastic. As we move on to 1440p with the same settings in game, we saw another pretty decent result. Turning things down a little would have guaranteed 60 FPS I'm sure, but I kept things at Ultra out of curiosity and we averaged around 50 FPS with the iChill 980Ti. And during this, the card didn't get too loud. I'll discuss the temperatures a little more at the end of the video. 4K resolution proved the most challenging as expected, with the settings needing to be dropped down to medium in order to hit 30 frames per second. Still, the game looks good, and if you'd rather the higher resolution and lower frame rate, then you'll have a good time here. It's not an ideal way to play, especially as the FPS will drop during races and whatnot, but there is always the low settings in the game menu. Personally, I'd stick with 1080p or 1440p and drop the settings just a little bit. In Battlefield 5 we saw an impressive set of results across the board, starting with 1080p Ultra and we saw 87 FPS on average. This was with DX11, not DX12 for reference. But the 980Ti does of course support Microsoft's latest API, so it will be worth seeing which runs better for you. The 1% and 0.1% figures were also pretty good, indicating very little if any stutter here, though the i5-8400 was hitting 100% usage at this resolution. Enter then 1440p. Again, Here we were gaming with 60 frames per second as to be expected, with decent percentile figures to follow. I think 1440p Ultra with a 980 Ti is the sweet spot, to be honest, and it eliminates the CPU bottleneck while still allowing the card to reach its maximum potential. Here's an unedited clip of the fans in action during an intense Battlefield 5 scene. The card never really gets louder than this, which was a surprise, and it was this little top fan that had me concerned at first. I assumed that it would be the culprit in providing a horrible whining tone, yet there was nothing. I'm impressed. Maybe some of these models would start to exhibit problems these days after years of use, but this one still seems to be going pretty strong. Finally, at 4K with medium settings, we saw a 56 frames per second average. A great result that may differ depending on the level and whether or not you're playing online, but it shouldn't be too significantly changed. So, Far Cry New Dawn actually has a few problems with my CPU, the i5-8400, something I mentioned in yesterday's video. It seems the game doesn't agree with the 6 cores of this processor, and I've heard other people say similar things. Nonetheless, this combination still handled the game pretty well. 1080p Ultra meant that we hit around 90 frames per second on average, though you can probably pick up on some of the stutters on screen. Turning things up to 1440p while retaining the Ultra settings meant an average of close to 70, though there were still times when the i5 hit 100% utilisation and caused a few frame drops. It's still a pleasant experience though, but going one step higher to 4K meant that the i5 could relax a little now. We were still seeing above 30 FPS all of the time with Ultra settings here, and closer to 60 should be achievable if you wanted to turn things down to medium or maybe even low. The colourful Far Cry New Dawn still looks great with reduced graphical options. So far it seems that this is still an ideal 1440p card. That goes for all 980 Ti's, not just this version. In fact, you may remember that we tested a reference 980 non-Ti a while ago. That's worth mentioning because there is still quite a big difference between that one and a Ti model, and maybe the 4 gigs of RAM plays a part in those differences too. After all, this has 6. So far, Rage 2 has been the only game we've needed to drop the settings in order to maintain at least 30 FPS at 4K, but I have a feeling PUBG may cause trouble here. Starting with 1080p Ultra, it was a decent experience without many issues. Performance may differ, again, depending on the map, but I don't think it will be by too much. The game looks great and the 980 Ti is still running pretty quietly. I said I'd come back to the temperature, so I'll discuss that now. After an hour of play, the iChill X4 Air Boss was up to just 64 degrees Celsius. It turns out that that silly little top fan does indeed help. Expect it to get higher temperature-wise if you're gaming all day, but it shouldn't get too much hotter. PUBG at 1440p on the Herculez here, so many different names, ran with 69 FPS on average, again proving to be the sweet spot resolution-wise. I kept the anti-aliasing on too, but the higher the resolution, the more you can probably turn this down. Moving on to 4K, where I thought we'd need to drop things, and surprisingly for 30 FPS, I was able to keep things at the Ultra preset. Obviously, if you want 60 frames per second or close to it, then medium or low would be better bets, but I thought this was pretty respectable in itself, and there were only a couple of drops below 30 during my entire match playthrough. Finally, I hit the card with something that I knew would finish it off, Metro Exodus, the benchmark for which will be sure to make the 980 Ti struggle, surely. I know this because I use a 1070 on a daily basis, and that comes out of a Metro Exodus gaming session absolutely sweating. So with 1080p Ultra, there were a few frame dips, and we averaged out at 47. Decent enough considering this game is like the new Crysis in terms of how it performs on modern, or any hardware for that matter. There were also a couple of stutters here, but nothing too bad. So let's jump back in at 1440p and assess the situation. This time, dropping the preset down to medium to try and see a few extra frames. My attempts at hitting closer to 60 seemed to work despite the higher resolution. Normal or medium settings seemed best here. Things always look better from the get-go, but as soon as the benchmark makes its way through this building and to the outside area, the frame rate starts to dip rather significantly. There are a few different levels that make up this game, so keep that in mind, as it will alter how it runs. Finally, it's 4K or 2160p. I kept the medium settings here, hoping for at least a 30 FPS average, and sure enough we saw 34, so I was pretty happy with the outcome in this situation. Overall, I've enjoyed my time with this super long named 980 Ti. I think this model and its 4-fan solution is better than I thought it would be, in terms of both noise and temperature, even though it won't appeal to everyone visually. I hope this also answers the question, is the 980 Ti still worth it? And there wasn't really much need to test too many games, as the answer from the start was probably obvious, but I'm off to unbox that free mousepad. So, thanks for watching. As always, if you enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one. Oh, come on, did you really think I would open this up without you guys? Look how cool this thing is. It's actually pretty decent. Let's get it out of the packet here and have a look. It smells really nice too, which is pretty cool, if that's something you need to worry about with a mouse pad or mouse mat. Nice size, and as you can see, the mouse rolls about on here just beautifully. This is actually a really thoughtful free inclusion with the graphics card here. As always though, and as I said before, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll catch all of you in the next one.